last but not least, we have joint speakers, Jeff Lewandowski and Jamie Hutchins from IOP Publishing, who will talk about a slightly different type of what happens when you strategic plan, and we'll share. So please have it.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here today. Jamie and I are going to hand off a couple of times. I'll explain why in a minute. First of all, I just want to provide a bit of context that will help with the rest of what we're going to present. And so I'll start with what's on this opening slide. So IOP Publishing, show of hands, how many people know IOP Publishing? Okay, more than I expected. I've been coming to SSP for a long time, and I do get a lot of questions about our organization. I'll give you a really brief context. IOP Publishing is wholly owned by the Institute of Physics in London, which is a scientific charity. It's a member organization. There are over 50,000 members. Basically, our publishing program supports the activities of the charity, and so the money we make, the profits we make in publishing gets gifted back. That's important to provide some of the context that Jamie's going to talk about our particular approach to strategic planning. Okay, so also I want to thank Anna for inviting me to speak and also being so flexible with my request, which was to do a co-speakership here. And the reason why, I've been with IOP for 10 years, and so I know where we've been. Jamie joined about 3.5 years ago, and Jamie's now the publishing director. He's responsible for our publishing strategy, and so I thought, who better to join me up here today than Jamie? And so I can talk a little bit about where we've been. Jamie can add a bit about the approach of where we're going. So I asked Anna if that would be okay, and she liked the idea. And then I realized, well, Jamie's my boss's boss. I better ask him too if it's okay. And so I texted Jamie and I said, hey, I got invited to speak at the strategic planning session at SSP. Do you want to do this with me? And he wrote back and said, you want to talk about our strategic plan in front of the whole industry, in front of all our competitors? And I said, yeah, that's right. And he said, Jeff, are you insane? But the thing to know is Jamie's from England, I'm from New England. We speak a little bit different versions of English. So, chips mean fries, lifts are elevators, trainers are Air Jordans. Jeff, are you insane means I love the idea, let's do it. So I'm going to hand off to Jamie, and he's going to kick us off, and then we're going to go back and forth a bit.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm Jamie Hutchins. I'm the publishing director at IOP, as Jeff just introduced me. I do love Jeff, by the way. I don't think he's crazy, but sometimes. Strategy is basically is a very difficult subject, and I think how many people this morning went to the keynote lecture? Yeah, so how many of you want to now leave traditional publishing and go and disrupt some stuff? Yeah, exactly. So when we're looking at strategy, we are quite a traditional company. We're attached to a society. And for them to fulfill their mission, we need to create revenue so that they can go and do good things in the world. One of the things they do sponsorships for people to make them into teachers of physics. And probably in the same thing in the US and other territories. One of the key things we have is just a lack of people going into the teaching professions to create the scientists of the future. So it's pretty important that what we do actually gives a return to that society and that we don't do anything perhaps too radical. So disruption's probably off. Strategy can be basically as simple or complex as you want to make it. Part of that's going to be predicted by the size of your organization and the kind of strategy you're trying to put together, obviously. So a large company will be more complex, and Joanne showed us their strategy plan there. Now, the size of our company, we're considered quite a medium-sized company. We have about 80 journals, but we have 5 publishing streams alongside those, so ebooks, conference proceedings, education, and also a journalism program, community websites. If you think each of those products also has a strategy plan, and then there's a linking plan to bring them all back together. You can look at the products, how they work together. You can segment your markets differently. You can look at the challenges you have in Southern Europe and focus that on a strategy plan. Or you can look at other territories and you can think about how products might be sold to different parts of the market. So a corporate market versus a government market versus an academic market. So our strategy plan for a medium-sized company is incredibly complex and very hard to understand, really. So the key things from a good strategy plan, so this is a question I ask myself all the time. So what is the basis of a good strategy? And I think that there are two things other than the strategy itself. The first thing is to have an implementation plan. So strategy with no plan to actually implement and be successful is basically pointless. An implementation plan needs to have good communication attached to it. And this is probably where most strategies really fall down. And I had some statistics of a course I went to recently. So 70 to 80% of all change initiatives fail. And they mostly fail because there's no implementation plan, and more importantly, no communication. So in terms of making it hard, and I think our keynote this morning, I think he called it strategy is hard grind. I think he was saying more like 99% of new initiatives fail. So maybe a more bleak view from a venture capitalist perspective. So we really need your strategy plan. If you have no vision, mission, values, again, I think Joanne showed those to us as well, and obviously Beth showed them from the Biophysics Society. So in our case, we have an institute who has their own strategy plan with 5 key initiatives behind it. And then we have ours reflecting below that, so it becomes already immediately very complex. You need to be very clear on the strategic choices you're making so people can understand what you're aiming to achieve. Then you need to look at your leadership. Does your leadership actually have the skills to push that agenda through over the longer term? You need to look at your people plan. So do you have the right people in place? Do you know how to nurture those people, give them careers, take them further forward as your business changes? And you need to look at the processes and systems that support all of that. And can you actually respond quickly enough as you make those choices? And you need to look at the structure of your company. So we're quite traditional in the sense that we have a publishing unit, but at one point our publishing unit was 5 different units. We have a commercial department. Who does which part of the strategy? How do we work closer together? And then how do you reward people for working closer together? So I'm not going to talk about strategy anymore because I think it's just such a complex thing to do in 20 minutes. But what I'm going to talk about is 3 sort of models that you can think about in terms of how you approach your strategy. Most companies will have a mixture of all 3 of these types of strategic approach. So the first one, the positioning and fit, is a very analytical approach. This is where you might use a very data-driven approach where you're looking at what products, segments in your market are working, which ones aren't, where you might best invest. And this is where much of our planning has sat in this area. And perhaps in the past we had more of a reputation for being innovative as a company. And what we found was during the course of the recession in 2008 and obviously the challenging markets that we all work in now, that by being overly planned, we found we lost the innovation and we lost some of the reputation that we were known for in the market. And we wanted to recapture that. So what we thought really was a way to do this was to plan for growth and to plan for us to be innovative, but to trust the people that know, perhaps better than us as a leadership team, what it is our communities want. So we opened up a fairly broad set of strategies, and I'll show you this, increased market share. So I'm sure almost everyone here probably has something like this to grow, to remain valid and reliable for your markets. Now, this was not my actual strategy that I released, but this was a challenge that we put to our teams who we consider on the front line, the people who deal with our customers and who could tell us better than we can tell them what we might do in future. So I'm going to hand over to Jeff now to tell you their interpretation.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on the journals business, which is our core business. So in increasing market share, there are a number of different ways to do that in journals business, as we all know. Acquiring new partners and new journals through that sort of route, that's definitely a way to grow. It's something that we do. I manage some key partner relationships in the DC office for IOP. But that's an uncertain thing. We're all after the same partners. It's very competitive. So that's not the area that we really wanted to focus on the most. So instead, we were talking about, why don't we launch some new journals, some of our own IOP journals. But that was about the directive. We didn't have a lot of specific ideas about where those would fit in. So we kind of had to take a look, not just at the external market and what the opportunities were, but also at ourselves. Who are we as an organization? How did we function? How did our portfolio function before we made decisions about what we were going to do next? So I'm going to use a case study. I'm going to talk about material science publishing. And so the first thing I'm going to talk about is this journal. So Nanotechnology. Nanotechnology, the journal, this is actually a very strong brand in the community. It was one of the world's first journals dedicated to nanoscience and technology. It's actually a 26-year-old brand now. This is an old slide, last year's slide. The point is, it's been around, it's established, it's really well known. It's published more nanoscience research than any other journal. But there's some questions as well. So why doesn't it have the highest impact factor in the field? Why is IOP not known as a nanoscience and nanotechnology publisher? One of the things that our teams did is before recently, we had about 80 journals, as Jamie said. We probably had about 80 different strategies, one for each title. And they weren't really joined up. Now, not everything about that is bad. So each of our individual publishers or editors responsible for the titles, there's some really strong things about that focus on individual titles. So one of the best things about it is that our staff had extremely tight connections to the communities. And that's something that's going to come back into this in a bit. But this is a really good example. So we're really focused on, okay, let's take a look at this one title. What does it mean for the organization? If we take a look at some of the other areas, some of the other titles where the material science research community publishes in IOP journals, there are quite a few examples. Some of these are partner journals, some of these are our own journals. You can just tell looking at them, there's no cohesive branding or design. It's a little bit all over the place. There's some gaps. If you know material science, this covers certain niches in material science, but not the entire field. There's opportunities for authors, but if you asked authors about publishing material science at IOP Publishing, they'd probably tell you about one or two of these titles that their papers fit into. They probably weren't familiar with the rest of them. So these were the sort of things we started thinking about as ourselves. And actually, when we took a look at this, I don't think we even realized as an organization that we have a pretty significant portfolio in material science. Many of these journals came out of the physics community before material science was really a buzzword. So things like nanotechnology, modeling and simulation, material science and engineering, these were developed from physicists before material science was a big buzzword in research, in publishing. So this sort of happened organically, but taking another look at it, today in the keynote, there was talk about resetting your data, resetting your assumptions. This was sort of that moment for us. So Jamie said, one of the key things is you have strategy, but let's put it down back on the shop floor. Let's give it to our staff to see what they can do. So this guy at the top, Joe McKenty, he's one of our publishing team. And take a look at this guy's face. If there's a more affable guy in publishing, I haven't met him yet. I haven't had the pleasure. So we said, Joe, go out and do your thing. Go talk to the community. One of the meetings he had was with George Gruner here at UCLA. And George Gruner is a material scientist, but he's also an entrepreneur. And there's a really important thing happening in material science right now. There's the research, the pure research, applied research, but then there's how that translates into innovation, technologies, products, actual things that have economic value. Even the White House has released an initiative on this in the last 5 years. This is a really important issue, but it's not something that's been addressed in a peer-reviewed journal before. So these guys had a discussion, happened to be over a beer or two, and they had a really productive discussion through this sort of collaboration with somebody that's been involved with IOP through some of our journals in the past, and Joe, who's been at IOP for a long time. They had a brainstorm, and so Joe came back. We said, what are you bringing back to us? He brought us this cocktail napkin, and this may not look like much, but there's actually a strategic plan for a new journal launch on this napkin. And it's all about that translational process. So how do we get from A to B, from the pure research and development into products, things that have economic impact? This was an innovative idea. Did we expect to have something so creative in our process of looking at what we're going to launch next? Not necessarily. Did we have expectations of a cocktail napkin? With this map? No, definitely not. But it turned into one of our first new launches in material science. So translational materials research, It's a peer-reviewed journal, but it's unique in that it brings together all of the stakeholders in that process that I'm describing. So the primary researchers in academics, but also in industry and basically across the board, R&D, but also policymakers, funders, entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, the people that make all of those connections, IP experts. So the editorial board and the community that this is aimed at, it's a unique group of people. Likewise, because it's such a diverse group of people, a peer-reviewed journal is not going to be the best vehicle for all of those people to communicate across the boundaries. And so TMR Plus is a sister blog that goes along with the journal. And through these two vehicles, the idea is to be able to tell this story, to make these connections in the community. And so that's what we did with TMR Plus and translational materials research. So that was one of our first launches into this area. There were two others. I talked about nanotechnology before. One of the things about nanotechnology is, like many of our journals, individual staff were shooting for the best impact factor they could get, rejecting a lot of papers. Now, despite that, most of our journals did not have the highest impact factor in the field. And what was happening to all those papers we rejected? I took a look at that. Most of them were getting published by other publishers, by our competitors. Materials Research Express, one of the key ideas behind it was we don't have a broad journal that captures all of materials science research. And this could actually be a place where papers that we would reject from our niche journals could land, because it's a very broad scope. Papers that don't quite fit those niche journals, they don't fit the scope, or they're not up to the quality standards of the other journals, they could be transferred into Materials Research Express. Now, on top of that, MRX offers some really great author services like extremely fast peer review and publication times. That's really important to researchers, as we all know. So the idea of this being a place where transfers could land from our other journals is that was part of the strategy. But one of the things that we learned that was not quite expected is those excellent author services, those really quick publication and peer review times, that was so valuable that we're actually receiving about half of the papers to this journal are direct submissions and not transfers from our other journals. That was a little bit unexpected. So that's a bit of something that's emerged from a general strategy plan that what we intended was not exactly what we landed on, but it's something that led to growth and increased market share. Another example is 2D materials. So we were lucky enough to have some close connection to the graphene community, and probably many in this room know that graphene was the hottest research area 5-6 years ago. We had some of the top connections in that field to some of our other journals, but what we didn't have, and what the community really didn't have, was a single place where people could publish research just for that community. Now, in addition to graphene, we also had information, due to those close ties to our communities, that there are other two-dimensional materials, much like graphene, often processed in similar ways to graphene. These were the up-and-coming things, and we timed it just right. We realized this. We worked very closely with the community and launched 2D materials. And the idea with 2D materials is let's aim this at the very best research, the highest quality, the highest impact, and it's worked out really well. In fact, in a few weeks, we're expecting to get its first impact factor of about 8 or 9 or maybe even higher. And that's a really big deal for us in our materials research portfolio. So adding these three to the mix, this has really filled in a lot of gaps of those journals that I showed you before. And so now we really are shaping up to have a materials research portfolio that offers something to all of the authors across materials science. And so as you can see at the top, IOP Materials, this is a brand that we launched to sort of highlight what we're doing here. Now, in addition to the brand, I want to emphasize that this also represents a change in the way that we do things at IOP. I told you before that our journals, 80 different journals, 80 different strategies, that's changed with this sort of strategic planning and process that we've been through. So through this sort of exercise of looking what we've got, what we can do next, we started working more collaboratively internally. And something special is happening. So we not only have something we can show off, but we're working together on a portfolio together. We're working more as groups rather than individuals. And this is something that we're applying to other areas of our publishing program as well. Finally, another thing that's nice about the branding is the engagement with the community. So with IOP Materials, we're able to take a new approach to marketing. So rather than marketing the 15 or 18 or 20 journals that a material scientist might publish in individually to subsets of that community, we can now target that entire community. And instead of talking about the titles, we can look at different subsets of research. And through this portal, so this was online, you could click on the area of interest for you and then head to a page that showed you all of your publishing options at IOP Publishing. So if you were shooting for the highest impact title for your work, you could find that. If this was maybe not the biggest result, but it's something you wanted to communicate quickly, you could put it in the general MRX and get it published very rapidly. So this is an example of a way that we were able to engage the community much more effectively through this new brand, through this new approach, and through this collection. And I'm handing it back to Jamie.
Thanks. So thanks for sticking with us for this, and something of a parable here, but this was like a massive lesson in leadership. And I'm not a physicist or a material scientist. I'm actually a psychologist, and a failed one at that. So in terms of being a publishing leader, trusting your teams and having them close to the community, this was something we heard again in the keynote this morning. This led to quite remarkable results that we hadn't anticipated when we set our initial strategy. The real thing here is the realization of that intent laid with our operational managers and the people that are very close to those communities and the people that ran the journals and the other products. So Joe McKenty that we just talked about there, he'd worked for us for 30 years and he ran the journalism program and now is sort of a cross-department champion for collaboration. The broad challenge basically resulted in many new ideas. So we just presented 3 new journals that we launched. There were 15 ideas. And when I started at IOP, I was told there were none. I just asked people what they were thinking about, and we had 15 ideas immediately. We're now sort of gating the number of new ideas that we go forward with, obviously, but what's remarkable is that as a leader, when you ask a creative group of people to solve a problem for you, you better be ready to act. And we actually launched those 3 journals in 6 months from concept to launch, which is, I think, the fastest we've ever managed. But it comes back to that strategic plan. If you have an implementation plan ready to roll when you get those ideas through, that's probably the most important thing that we learn. Also, pushing those ideas a bit further. So I see my job as challenging rather than sort of directing. So when you get a great idea forward, pushing it into new directions, looking at it from all angles, looking to see if there's other things that you can get from that. And that challenge leads to new collaboration and new ideas. And what we then take all of that learning collectively and take that back into our strategic planning and then look how we can apply that across the rest of our portfolio and how we can think about strategy for the future. So really what we're talking about here is we start with the intended strategy. There may be parts of that, the unrealized strategy. So Jeff talked about the fact that we were looking at one point about more partnerships, and that has happened, but it wasn't the strategy we decided upon for this particular group of titles. Something in the middle, that creativity, the innovation, the spirit that we have with our communities, led to a more emergent strategy. And then we've used that realized strategy then there has something we've applied to the rest of our portfolio. And I think for me, this is probably the most exciting part. We started in this position where we were very planned, very fixed on what we were going to be doing. We missed part of our own identity in the past, which was being an innovative company. And by providing a more flexible approach to setting our strategy and learning from the outcomes of that, I think what we've actually done is recapture some of that innovation that we were known for in the past. Okay, thank you, everyone.